Hi, my name is Anastasopoulos, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Georgia in public administration and policy, political science, and statistics. And what I'm going to be presenting today is a paper that I did with some of my wonderful co-authors called Understanding the Political Ideology of Legislators from Social Media Images for ICWSM 2020. And I'm really delighted to present this, and I'm looking forward to many of your questions. So we start off with the premise that images contain encoded political messages. And if you want to think about it in a deeper way, images contain encoded political messages, and what our goal is in this project is to take those messages and to kind of decode them. Thought about another way, you could imagine an image as being like a compressed zip file with a great deal of information within it. And the goal of this project is really to decompress or unzip, let's say, that compressed file. And this is, this might sound like an unusual concept, but actually everyone really understands this concept, because when you hear the phrase "an image is worth 1,000 words," that's exactly what what you're hearing, and that's exactly what you understand you understand that images contain many different types of information within them. So what do I mean by encoded political images? Well, politicians themselves will encode political information in the images that they take. Of course, their goal is to get reelected, so they want to make sure that every time they post an image on Facebook or wherever, Instagram and online on their websites, that image conveys some information about who they are, right? So an example, who they are as a politician, right? So an example of this is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who is a senator from New York, and she has a rainbow background overlaid on her image. So the coded political message from this, well, at least one of them, if we unzip this file and think about this compressed information contained within this image, that coded political message is, or at least one of them is, that Senator Gillibrand supports the LGBTQIA community. But there's more information than that encoded within this image, of course. There's also ideological information. So if Senator Gillibrand supports the LGBTQIA community, she is also someone who, if you were to place her on the left-right ideological spectrum, this suggests that she is more on the left spectrum. On the other hand, we see a picture of Senator Gillibrand with some elderly constituents, and there's also a great deal of encoded information within this as well. This was also an image posted by her on Facebook. And that information is something more along the lines of Senator Gillibrand cares about her elderly constituents. And one might argue that the political information or the ideological information attached to that is one of a more moderate or neutral tenor. Now, kind of flipping sides from Democrat to Republican, we have the late Senator John McCain, who has a great deal of images on Facebook, and a lot of his images look something like this, where Senator McCain is posing next to law enforcement officers. The encoded message that we could draw from that, again, one of many encoded messages, is that Senator McCain supports law enforcement. And that support for law enforcement translates to this ideological dimension, this left-right ideological dimension, as Senator McCain is someone who can be positioned more on the right. On the other hand, we have Senator McCain taking photos with members of the NAACP. I believe he was a strong supporter of the NAACP during his time in Congress. And this image suggests something a little bit different about Senator McCain. It suggests that he cares about his African American constituents, and perhaps to many individuals might suggest that he is a politician who tends to be more left-wing and liberal-leaning as a result. So the goal of this paper is really to develop a systematic method to decode these messages, to unzip this compressed zip file that each political image is exuding, right? And this is what we do in our paper. So overall, we have three goals. The first is, as I mentioned before, decoding particularly the political ideology aspect of images. And the methods that we use for that are convolutional neural networks, which are trained on party-coded Facebook images from the U.S. Congress, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And our outputs, or the kind of conclusions that we draw, are not only the production of some ideological scores for these images, right? So we actually develop a system where you could take kind of pixel data and you could pass it through these convolutional neural networks that we trained and spit out an ideological score. But we're also able to learn about which aspects of images are related to political ideology. And you could think of this again as the image decompression kind of goal that we had that I mentioned in the beginning. So the data that we used was a large Facebook database collected by the authors of over 250,000 images with 319 members of Congress, and of course we have their party affiliation for each of these, which we use as the training label. We use transfer learning, ResNet-34 architecture, instantiated convolutional neural network to identify basically an output label of Democratic and Republican photos. So we trained on one portion of the data, and then we tested on another portion of the data to see how well our model did. We originally restricted to white males to avoid gender and race confounding, but since then have included more images from different races, and initially we got a 59.28% accuracy for predicting image party label, and we had a 82.35% accuracy rate for the politician label, right, for the aggregate photos, right? Okay, so in order to figure out whether the method that we're developing here has any kind of grounding in some of the other types of methods used to measure political ideology, we took what are known as the nominate scores, or political ideology scores, of members of Congress, which are based on their roll call votes, right? So these scores are based entirely on their voting behavior in Congress, and these are also the gold standard, and we correlated these nominate scores based on roll call voting with these kind of predicted probability scores that we generated from our convolutional neural network. And we actually found quite a strong correlation, suggesting that the metric that we developed is in fact a measure that can be used to measure, is in fact a means of measuring political ideology within images. We also identified images using the measure that we created of very conservative images and did some analyses on them, of very liberal images and did some analyses on them, which I'll talk about in a second. And we also used gradient-based localization to figure out precisely which types of features of images were the ones that most well distinguished the liberal / Democratic individuals from conservative / Republican individuals. And this is just an example of that. You can see that the ties, flags, military garb, these are the things that tend to distinguish Democratic from Republican images. Protest signs, these are the types of things that female individuals, these are the types of things that differentiate, that identify Democratic images. We also did another validation study where we identified all of the labels in each of the images and used the score to figure out which were those features of the images that most differentiated conservative from liberal images, Democratic from Republican images, and we actually found the same results that we had discovered using these other methods, as I discussed before. In the conservative side on the right, that's table 1B, We see that things like military officer, military person, official uniform, these are all the kinds of things that we tend to see in more Republican images. And these are actually things that if you go into the literature, the psychology literature, and you look at the kind of psychology of conservatism, what you'll find is that these are things that correlate with kind of core conservative values, the need for structure, the need for order, and so on. Whereas in the liberal images, we see aspects of images that suggest that kind of less order-oriented individuals, right? We see open sea, we see ocean, nature reserves, and we see these types of features. And again, of course, some of the things we discover here are in part, idiosyncratic results from what is available in the Google Vision API, but nevertheless, they match up with a lot of other things we've discovered. So we find that really the metric that we created and from all kind of studies that we did suggests that there's really deeply embedded aspects of conservative and liberal ideology compressed, encoded within these images. And then that's just kind of this study is the first step towards understanding that. So again, the goal of this paper was to take these compressed means of communicating political information, this encoded means of communicating political information, these images, which have really never been systematically decoded until recently, and we use these deep learning tools, these machine learning tools, to decode them or decompress them. We developed this methodology not only to learn more about the ideological aspects of images, but also to learn about to measure to measure ideology within images, and then to do further studies with that. And finally, we really learned that image ideology, which we suspected to begin with, corresponds to deeply rooted psychological aspects of political ideology, and future studies will focus on that. Thank you very much.